Hi everyone, welcome to me showing you how to use InDesign. It's pretty simple. So today I'm going to go over InDesign and I'm going to go over a few things. I'm going to say how to bring in your artwork into InDesign. InDesign, as I explained before, is that final place that you bring in everything that you've created in Illustrator and in Photoshop. You bring those items into all those elements into InDesign and kind of finalize your overall layout of your design. So for instance, if you're creating, a flyer, things like that, you'll bring in the images that you want to use and the logo that you created or any other object or graphic that you've created. You'll bring that all into InDesign and then you'll start laying out the flyer or whatever it is that you're laying out. But today I'm gonna show you how to do that, how to bring all your artwork in. We're gonna go over margins and bleeds and columns. I'll show you pages, spreads, master pages, and I'll quickly show you somewhat how to set up your overall design. So right now we are in InDesign. Once you open up InDesign, this little box actually is going to show up, not this back part. I actually already have my document open just to save time, just so I don't get the spinny wheel. But this little box will open up where you can create a new document. And what's nice about Adobe products in general is that they give you a lot of presets, especially for like commonly sized things. So for instance, you have your recent of what you've just worked in. You have your saved if you wanted to save a preset, but then there's also print for common print sizes, common web sizes, and then common mobile sized things. And what's nice too is that if you notice here, units of measurement, that's actually really big in graphic design because we measure things slightly differently than everyone else does in the world. Our three main units of measurement are points, picots, and inches, and obviously four common units of measurement: points, picots, inches, and pixels. Specifically inches, I think as obviously Americans, we use inches for like everything. So I'm going to use inches today because I think it's just a little bit more, we're a little bit more familiar with that. But you'll see too is that point still becomes something that we use even if we are defaulting our whole document to inches. But if you've noticed that even though I'm under the print tab, I like to say this is just a personal thing that I like to do. This is just me as a graphic designer. I like to stay under the print tab. I like to select one of the preset print sizes just because that's their preset. These are standardized page sizes. Every printer is basically going to be printing on them. So it's easier to design in that so that when I send it to a printer, they know exactly what I need. So I'm going to be that letter size, which is 8.5 by 11. This has picas here, but when you go over here to the preset details, you'll see here that the units I set to inches. So it would automatically change the size to 8.5 by 11 inches. Now, if I wanted to edit that, I can either select in here, type myself. I can type exactly the sizes that I want for the width and the height. I can use the arrows to do that as well. And then if I decide, you know what, I don't know about inches, maybe I do want to do pixels, it'll automatically update these numbers to be that same size that you wanted before. It'll just be in pixels, but I'm going to leave it in inches. You can also decide the orientation of your page. It can either be portrait or landscape. It's selected by the blue. So right now I've selected the portrait orientation, but I could have landscape if I wanted to, but I'm going to keep it portrait mode. And then from the get, I can kind of decide, how many pages do I want? I'll just keep it at 1. And then facing pages, that's how you create spreads. You're telling InDesign that you want two pages to be facing each other when you have two pages that are next to each other, and they'll be facing each other instead of being one by one. I'll show you exactly what that means when we get into the document. But from the beginning, before you even start designing, when you're still setting up the page, you can decide that, especially if you know what you're going to design. So if you're designing like a book, a magazine, right, something where you're flipping through pages, you already know, okay, I'm going to turn on facing pages because I'm going to need that. If you're not sure how you want to display something yet, you can always have it turned off and then go back in and turn it on, or you can have it turned on now and then always turn it off once you're in the document. So I'll show you how to do that as well. You can also tell the document how many columns you want from the start. You can say, I want 2 or 3, right? And then the column gutter, that's the space between each column. So you can determine how much space you want between every column that you create. If you are a graphic designer for like a newsletter, not a newsletter, a magazine, right, a newspaper, something where you're actually creating a printed document like this, then you're probably going to be working in columns and column gutters a lot. But if it's not something that you're doing every day, right, you're doing different projects that require different sizing and different pages, right? The projects are just different from each other, then you're going to change that every single time or leave it as is. Then there's margins. Margins, that space around your, like the edges of your page, of your artboard. And obviously we never want to go past margins, because the minute we go past a margin in terms of our design, right, if we are the words that we're using, the elements, all those graphics that we're using, if we place them outside of the margin, there's potential that they can get cut off when they go to print. So we always want to make sure we're, for the most part, I mean, you can go outside of the margins a little, but just know that the closer you get to the edge, the more likely it'll get cut off when it gets printed. But if you are designing something where you do want things to go off the page, so especially if it's like color, right? If the whole page, if you're adding in a block of color to the background, or you want the image to go to the very edge of the page, right? You don't want it to get cut off. You want it to look like it's right at the edge. That's where you're going to start incorporating a bleed. So bleed is almost like an extended margin, right? An extended area that we give ourselves to make sure that we are stretching our art to that point, so that when it gets cut, right? So when it actually gets printed by the printer and gets cut down to the size that we want it to get cut down, our design is stretching out to the very edge, if that's what we want, without things getting cut off inappropriately, right? So it doesn't look like an error. We actually wanted it to get stretched out. And I'll show you kind of what that means. And what's nice too is that 0.25 inches for a bleed, that's standard. So if you wanted that to be your standardized, so if you just always wanted to have a bleed just to make sure, you can always do that. But if you know you're going to be designing something where there's not going to be the need for printing, or you're not going to design something where something is going to go off the page, then you don't even need to worry about the bleed. But if you are printing something where an object or element is going to go off the page, then you want to make sure that you are going to incorporate bleeds into your work. So once I've done all that, I'm going to press create, and it is going to create a blank document. I'm not going to actually press it today because I've already created my document. And when you actually create your document, it's actually going to look like this, right? This is going to say untitled up here, and it's just going to be a blank document. And then you can start doing your designing. You can start adding in your elements. You can start manipulating your typography. I've already started to do this. And to show you, I actually have my spreads. I already have facing pages selected, so I'll show you to do that. So let's say you create your document and you're like, oh man, I don't want it like this. I should have did something different when I first set it up. You still have time to change it. You go to File, Document Setup, and this little window pops up, and then you can start editing your document and how you set it up. So one thing you can do is you can turn off facing pages. So if you noticed, excuse me, I have preview selected. So make sure this box is always selected so that you can actually see something before you hit OK. So because I have it selected, I can preview all these changes that I'm making to my page. So for instance, facing pages, this was clicked on. This is now a spread. These are 2 pages that are facing each other. You can see it here too in my pages panel. If I unselect it, The pages are not facing each other. They're not spreads. They're just single pages, organized one at a time. So you can determine what's best for the project that you're working on. Obviously, if you're working on like a flyer, then you don't need them to be facing each other because you're working on this single page by itself. If you're working in more of a book, right, a booklet, a magazine, a newspaper, newsletter, right, where you're going to have spreads, you're going to have 2 pages next to each other. That kind of creates, even though you're designing them as one page, they're going to be lining up once they're printed to create one large design. You want to make sure that you're already working in spreads so that you can make sure that you are lining things up properly, taking into consideration where the page divides, where that seam is when a page gets folded in half, things like that. You just want to make sure that you're designing that way. So facing pages is good for when you're going to have more of that book style. But if you're really just designing one page at a time and they're not meant to be seen all together, they're just individual, then yeah, you can definitely turn off facing pages and then just design each page as they go. So that's one way that you can turn on or turn off. I'm going to turn ours off. We don't need it right now. Another thing you can do after the fact too is you can change the size of your page, the orientation of your page. You can manipulate the margins if you want a little bit more space. You can manipulate the gutters if you think you need more or less, and you can view all of that. You could even change the number of pages that you have. Right now I have 4 pages. Well, if I wanted 5, I could change it here. It's automatically going to add a 5th page. Once I am good with the way it looks, I'm going to hit OK, and it'll it'll make sure that all of those changes that you made get applied. If you didn't make any changes, you can always just hit cancel. Or if you started to make changes, you're like, nah, I don't want that. You can always hit cancel. So there you go. There's your document. That's how you edit it. That's how you get spreads versus not having spreads in your document in InDesign. Now, let's get to the actual designing portion of this. Once you're starting to design your overall document, you're like, you know what? I have this really large, this is going to be 4 pages long. I need the logo to show up on every single page in the same exact location. You can add that manually, right? You can say, okay, I'll have the logo right here in this top right section. And you could do that manually every single time you create a page. Or you can save time by just adding it to the master page. So this page up here says a parent. If you double click on that little white page up there, it'll bring you to a blank page. That's your master page. Anything that you do to this page will automatically be applied to all the other pages in your document. And let's pretend that this little square I just made, let's pretend that's a logo. It's not a logo, but let's pretend it's a logo, right? I just added that to the top right corner of my master page. Now I'm going to look at one of my other pages in the BAM. It is automatically there and I can't click it. It's locked in. It's in the same place on every single page. If I were to create a new page, it'll also show up there. If you look here on the side, the little thumbnails, you can see too that it's in the corner as well. That will save you time. That will save you a lot of time when you're designing, so that you're not having to constantly do the same thing over and over again. You can kind of place something where you want it to place. And if you know it needs to be there on every other page, you can do that. So the next thing we're going to do is, once we have those master pages already set up, we are going to look at adding in some of our work. So actually, before we add in our work, I'm going to show you kind of what those bleeds mean. So when we're looking at our document, there's 2 views that we can have. One's a print view, one's kind of more of a design view. Right now we're in print view. Sorry, we are in print view. This is what it's going to look like if I printed it out. But if we wanted to go more into that design view so that we can edit it, make sure things line up a little better, you're going to take your hand off your mouse. Don't be clicking, don't touch anything, and just go to your keyboard and click W. And now it's going to switch it to this design view of everything. And that's where you're going to see all of the guidelines of your work. So this purple box we see, so the white box, obviously that's our document, that's the page. The purple box is, that's where our margins are. The blue box is just the frame around all of the objects that we have in here. And then the red box is our bleed. So our bleed goes off the page. We're telling InDesign, hey, I'm going to stretch out something to the very edge so that when I go to print it, the printer knows that I have this much wiggle room to cut, so that it looks like it's going off to the page. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add an object here, a box, just a colored box, and I'm going to go off the page. And you'll see too is that I'm going off the page, double click in this little box to change the color of it. And the back color here is the stroke. That's what it's going to be, right? So that's the box that I've created. I changed the stroke to white. The color inside is like this purple color, and I've stretched it out beyond the page, past the margin, beyond the actual page, all the way to this, my bleed guideline. So once I do that, I'm going to hit that W again to toggle back to print view. And you can see here is that it cut a portion of this off, right? The blue box shows you the actual outline of the object here. And you'll see that some of it's cut off. I want that on purpose because I want to make sure that when this gets printed, it goes all the way off to the edge. So when I'm working with an actual printer, a print company, I'll let them know, hey, I do have bleeds. You'll add that in, you'll add the bleeds to the overall document. Then when you export it, you'll make sure that you check bleeds too, so that when it'll add those bleed guidelines so they know where to cut down so that your graphic, the color, whatever it is, stretches all the way to the edge of the document. So that's how you kind of work with bleeds. Now, once you have those, once you have everything in that you want to go off to the edge of the page, you might want to add in some more things like one of your artwork. So the way you're going to do that, there's two ways. You're either going to do file place, or what's nice is that Adobe gives you the shortcuts right next to some of these things. So you can either do file place or you can do Command D if you're working on a Mac. If you're working on a PC, it's Control D. So for instance, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna hit Command D, and it's gonna open up a box to select my artwork, to place it within the document. I already know what I'm going to do. It is this one, boy smiling, and it's a Photoshop file because it says PSD. I'm gonna hit open. You can either double click or you can hit open. And then once you do that, your cursor is going to change to reveal the thumbnail of what you selected. Now to place this into the actual document, you can do one of two things. You can either click and it'll make it as big as possible, right? And actually goes off the page. Or you can drag, you can click and drag to tell the computer how big, the program how big you actually want it. So that's how big I wanted it. This bounding box, the blue box is your bounding box. If you were to move it, it's not going to change the actual image or graphic inside. Think of it almost like a frame. So if I were to really make it small, it's going to cut off some of my artwork that I have in here. If I make it big, it's just going to reveal some of it, and the rest of it's going to be white. So I like to make sure that the bounding box is as close to my graphic as possible. That's just to stay organized, and so I don't have all these boxes going everywhere. So what you're going to do, though, is that if you want to resize the image inside, you're going to select this. You're going to hold down Shift Command. Then you're going to click one of the edges and you're going to drag. That is going to make your photo bigger, or your element bigger. If it's not a photo, if it's like a graphic or something, it's going to make it bigger. And as you see here, as I made it bigger, I noticed, oh man, I really got to clean this up. It's sloppy. I can't clean it up in InDesign. I have to go back into Photoshop, clean it up there. Once I save that, I'd go over here to links and I double click. There's going to be like, once I save it in the program, this little error message might show up. You'll double click that and it'll automatically update your file in here to match however you saved it in those other programs. So if I open up Photoshop, I edit it, I re-edit it in Photoshop, I come back in InDesign, I see the fact that it has an error message, I double click the error message to make it go away, my image will update to reflect all the changes I made in Photoshop. That's why I love InDesign, because it's that easy. So let's say I did all that and I got rid of all these edges and this was all cleaned up all nice and it looked really good, right? I placed it in here and now I want to manipulate my text. I want to create maybe some columns to go around so it works a little bit better. So this is the way I like to do it. So I'm going to show you the way I like to do it. So I like to place all of the text that I want to use into one of my text boxes, and to do that, you're going to go over to this little T. You'll click that and you'll just create your text box. You'll make it as big as you want. You can either click and it'll just make it, or you can click and drag. I already made my text box and I added in my text. If you can't understand what this text means, that's okay. It is filler text. You're not meant to understand what it means. So you're not losing it. It is just filler text. So I put all my text in that I want to use. Now I'm going to edit what I want my first column to be. And I want it to be this big. But you've noticed here is that I made it smaller than the text. There's more text in this box, but since it's so small, it's not going to show all the text. So because of that, you're going to get this little red box with a plus sign in it, and you're going to click it. So you click that, and your cursor is going to change to show a thumbnail of the remaining text that has been cut off because your box is small enough. So once you do that, you're going to click and drag, and it is going to automatically create another text box with the remaining text in it. And again, if you don't make it big enough, again, you'll see here too, another little red box with a plus sign popped up. I'm going to click on that. It's going to change my cursor, and then I'm going to drag and create another column. So what's nice is I like doing it this way because that means all of my columns that I just created, they're all linked to each other. And when I say linked, is that if I do something to one, it'll basically apply it to the others in some way. And I'll show you. If I decide, you know what, this box is too big and I shrink it, all the words will automatically shift down to fit within this box. And then if anything doesn't fit in this box, it'll get pushed into this one. And if that's something that doesn't fit there, it'll get pushed into this one. I think that's super helpful so that you don't miss anything, right? You don't have another box that you now need to work in, right? All of these are linked to each other. It's nice too. So if you have to select everything, you just click inside one of these boxes so that the little cursor line pops up, and then you can either drag, right, and select everything, or you can hit Command A and it'll select everything within all three columns because they're linked to each other. So when you go over here to your properties panel and you want to start changing maybe the typeface, I love Avenir, it's my favorite. You can start changing everything all at once, whether that's the size of everything all at once, or you can manipulate the leading. So the leading is the amount of space between each line of text. If you want it to be more or less, you can determine that all at once. You can change the alignment, right? You can just edit the text all at once so that you're not, again, it's just saving you time and making sure everything stays as uniform as possible. So there's consistency throughout your whole entire design. So that's one way to do that. But as you can see here too, is that this is getting a little close to this guy. So I'm actually going to, you can either do one of two things. You can use a text wrap. You'll learn more about this in typography when you take that course. You select whatever you want to, you want the text to wrap around. You can do that. I suggest just doing it manually because I feel like you have a little bit more control. So just select those areas where you kind of want to bring the text down to fit a little better and just do it that way. Again, you'll learn more about wrapping text when you take your typography course. But I'm just doing this because I can't stand to look at that. And also I like doing it. I like kind of editing this manually because I feel like it gives me a little bit more control. And there you go. Those are your columns. What's nice too is that, again, InDesign is all about layout design. So if you did want to really make sure that this follows a certain grid or pattern, you can use you can use your rulers here. And what you can do is you can click and drag, and it'll automatically bring, and this isn't going to show up in your print. These are guidelines to help you to make sure that you are, placing everything nicely within the grid that maybe you selected. And what's nice too is that you can kind of do this before you actually even create something. So I just put these grids in here, but let's say I had a blank page, right? And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to put anything in yet before I've kind of laid it out. You can do that. You can start click and drag the rulers to kind of determine where you're going to put stuff. So if you know too is like, all right, I'm going to put a logo here, right, in this little area. But I also want my text to fit here. You can start saying this is kind of where I want everything. And then that way, when you actually start laying it all out, you have a better idea of where things are going to go. So again, let's say I have my logo in this box. Let's say I have my title here, and you can see me lining everything up. I'm just picking something. Right. Let's say that's my title. And I'm like, no, I want it to be as big as this box allows me to be. You can start lining up all of your text right on these lines. That way there is a little bit, again, you're adding structure to your design. So if you ever see me allow this lack structure, it's because you really do need to place everything nicely. And like I said, this stuff isn't going to show up um, once you start. When you actually go to print this, it's not going to show up in here. So if I were to get out, you can see is that things are starting to line up nicely, right? And then as you work it, you might say, you know what, I need to bring this out a little bit more. You can start using those as guidelines to nicely lay out your overall design. So that's another thing that you can do with some of your rulers. Again, that's just to add a little bit more structure to your overall design if that's what you were going for, so that you know too, is like when you want to bring something in, you can bring it in a way where it just looks really nice. And clean lines, everything's lined up nicely, right? And you can just start really playing around with the overall structure. So I really encourage you guys to really use those grids and guidelines to help you lay out your work. I think that's about it, right? I showed you guys InDesign how to bring your artwork in. We talked about margins and bleeds, showed you some columns. We talked about pages and spreads, master pages. These are your pages. These are all of this whole area over here. These are your panels. Under your page panel, you'll see all the different pages that you work with. Your master pages are up here. Properties is like if you're selected into something, you can start manipulating that. So for instance, text, you can manipulate the typography in any way that you want. If it's just like an object, you can manipulate like the fill and the stroke and things like that. So definitely start working and playing around with InDesign. I love InDesign. It is my favorite. I want to design myself a t-shirt that says I love InDesign. That's how much I love it. And then right under I love InDesign, I'll put I also love Avenir because that is my favorite font. That's my favorite font family, I should say. And you'll learn more about typography in your typography class. But that's it. That is InDesign. That's kind of like a basic overview of it. If you have questions, please let me know, and I will be happy to show you how to use it even more. And that's it.